A 64-year-old man with a pension and one divorce behind him typed out exactly why he'd never let another woman into his life and ended the whole comment with one word: relief. In this video, I'm going to show you why thousands of older men are making this exact choice and why the life everyone said they'd regret is the one they're fighting to protect. They're not lonely, they're not bitter. They're waking up every morning to a life that finally belongs to them. And later in this video, I'm going to share a comment that got over 1,000 likes in 24 hours from a man who summed up the entire financial reality of this choice in one sentence. And I'm going to tell you about a man who spent decades being passed over by women and came to understand that every single rejection was actually God's hand keeping him on the right path. Because the story you've been told about men who live alone is dead wrong. And brother, by the end of this, you'll know exactly why. You know what's funny? Nobody talks about the moment it actually happens. Not the divorce, not the breakup, the moment inside your own head when something just stops. You wake up one morning and the first thing you think about is what you want for breakfast. Not her mood, not what you forgot to do, not the conversation you've been putting off for 3 weeks, just breakfast. And you lie there for a second thinking, wait, when did that stop being normal? That's the moment. That's where this starts for most of these men. No big blow up, no dramatic exit, just a quiet Tuesday morning when you realized your own head finally belonged to you again. And how good that felt. It told you everything about how bad it had gotten. And once you feel it, you can't go back to pretending you don't. Something shifts, and it doesn't shift back. Now here's what these men will tell you. The ones who've been living this for 5 years, 10 years, some of them longer. They don't describe it like a loss, not a single one of them. They describe it the way you describe getting out of a car after a 12-hour drive. That exhale, that moment when your legs straighten out and you think, I didn't realize how cramped I was, because nobody told them this was on the other side. Nobody sat them down and said, look, if you stop trying to fit yourself into something that was never built for you, what you find is not emptiness, it's just your life. The one that doesn't require you to be a smaller, quieter, more carefully edited version of yourself every single day, just to keep the peace. That's what they found, and every single one of them will tell you the same thing. They wish they'd found it sooner, but here's the part that nobody talks about. This didn't come free. There was a real price, and before you can understand why the other side feels the way it does, you need to understand what it actually cost these men to get there. You know what nobody ever asks? When they tell you to get back out there, when they say the right one is waiting, when your sister gives you the speech about companionship, nobody ever stops and asks what you already gave. Nobody sits with you and adds it up. It's the 30 years of working 50-hour weeks, not because you loved it, but because that's what you signed up for when you said, I do. You were the provider, the fixer, the guy who came home exhausted and still had to figure out what was wrong before you even took your shoes off. You managed her moods, navigated her emotions, tiptoed around landmines you didn't plant, and somehow it was never quite enough. You used to go to the track on Saturdays. You had your numbers, you had your guys. You'd spend 3 hours at the OTB watching the races on the TVs with a coffee and a racing form and nobody needing anything from you. That stopped somewhere around year 4. Too much to do, wrong priorities, you let it go. Most of you let something go. Picture this. It's a Tuesday. You're in the parking lot at work at 5:45. You've been sitting there for 20 minutes, not because you forgot anything, not because you're on a call, because you're not ready to go inside yet, because the inside of your car is the most peaceful place in your life right now. And you know the second you walk through that door, the evening starts managing itself. You sat in that parking lot. Maybe not that exact one, but you know the feeling. You watched couples at restaurants and realized you'd never actually had that. Not in 30 years of trying. And the decisions where to live, how to spend the holidays, which friends were acceptable. Most of them went her way, not because she was right, because peace was easier than the fight. And this is what kills me, because I hear it every single day from men in these comments. You gave support and got silence. You showed up during her crises and she disappeared during yours. You spent decades being slightly less than yourself in your own home because the full version of you was too much friction for the situation. Some of you did this for 30 years and you called it love. What the men who walked away now understand, and what took most of them way too long to see, is that it wasn't love, it was labor, constant, invisible, unpaid labor, and the only wage was the right to keep doing it tomorrow. Someone left a comment on one of our videos, goes by RedSoul61, and he said something that stopped me cold. He said, solitude does not mandate loneliness. Peace and quiet does not mandate boredom. That's the whole argument right there. Red Soul 61 gave relationships multiple shots, watched the same patterns play out every time, and eventually stopped asking, when are you going to find the right one? And started asking, what am I actually looking for? When he sat with that honestly, the answer wasn't another relationship, it was what he already had. His dog, his routines, a Tuesday evening that belongs entirely to him. He figured something out that most men spend their entire lives chasing and never catch. Just clarity and the right to decide how his own days go. And I'll tell you something, the comment that captures all of this better than anything I've ever read came from a man in our community who spent his entire life being overlooked. And what he figured out about every woman who ever passed him over will stop you cold. That's coming up in a few minutes. But first, because people always get this wrong, society frames this choice as failure, as what happens when something went wrong, when you couldn't make it work. The framing is always deficit, always about what's missing from you. But the men living it will tell you something different. The ones who look broken aren't the ones sitting quietly in their own houses on a Saturday night, eating what they want, sleeping without anxiety. The broken ones are white-knuckling through marriages that stopped working 8 years ago, checking the temperature of the house before they say a word, spending more energy managing the relationship than actually living their life. The older man who chose solitude didn't give up. He did something harder. He looked honestly at what a relationship was actually costing him, weighed it against what he'd been told it was worth, and made a decision. He chose himself, maybe for the first time in a very long time. Now listen to this, because this one captures it better than anything I could say myself. Someone commented on one of our earlier videos. Goes by Paranormal Pat. He's 60, never married. He spent his whole working life building his finances, his independence, a life that actually belonged to him. And as he did that through his 30s, 40s, 50s, the women who hadn't been interested when he had nothing became very interested once he had something. He knows exactly why. He sees it clearly and he's not bitter about it. He left a comment that the whole community stopped on. He said, their rejection was God's protection. Read that again. Their rejection was God's protection. That's not something a bitter man says. A bitter man has a list of grievances, and he wants you to hear every one of them. That line comes from somewhere completely different. It comes from a man who's had enough distance, enough time, enough perspective to look back at the full arc of his life and see that the closed doors were actually the thing that kept him free. That every woman who passed him over, every relationship that fell apart, every time he got passed by for someone flashier, all of it was protection from decades of emotional labor, from funding someone else's lifestyle, from the slow rearrangement of himself that happens in relationships that don't fit. He didn't lose anything. He was being kept for something better. That's wisdom, the kind that only comes from living long enough to see the whole arc. And once that clarity settles in, once you've done the emotional accounting and made your peace with it, something else comes into focus. Something practical that these men don't talk about in public, but absolutely think about in private. The money. One of the men in our community, this came from a comment on our retirement video, said something that landed with over 1,000 likes in less than a day. He said, it's amazing how much less money I need when I don't have a woman in my life. 1,000 people liked that because 1,000 people knew exactly what he meant. And he wasn't complaining, he was genuinely surprised. Because nobody tells you this part. Nobody sits you down and walks you through what the financial side of solitude actually looks like. Not the scary version they used to keep you in line, but the real one. The one these men are actually living. Nobody talks about this part honestly, so let's do that right now. When you remove a partner from the equation at 60 or 65, something happens to your finances that most men aren't prepared for. They get simpler, they get lighter, not because you're cheap or because you've given up on living well, but because the overhead that came with the relationship quietly disappears. and you don't realize how much it was costing you until it's gone. Think about what actually changes. There's no second person's lifestyle to fund, no vacations chosen for her preferences, no events attended out of obligation, no gifts for people you barely know. The slow financial drift towards spending that serves the relationship instead of serving your actual life, that stops. There's a man in our community, $15,000 a month pension, could live extremely well by any measure. He told us he had been spending nearly $3,000 of that every month on the relationship between dining out, travel she chose, gifts for her family, and the general financial maintenance of keeping someone comfortable. When he stepped back, that $3,000 didn't disappear, it went somewhere else. He's been to Portugal twice and spent 6 weeks in Southeast Asia since, not because he got rich, because he stopped paying a tax that wasn't doing him any good. That story is not unusual. The numbers vary, the math is always the same. Subtract the person spending your money, and suddenly there's money. These men aren't depriving themselves, they're redirecting. Every dollar that used to go toward maintaining a relationship is now building something that actually belongs to them. That's not a small thing. At 60, 65, or 70, when the runway is defined and every year counts, the financial clarity that comes with solitude is one of the most underrated advantages these men have. They know exactly what they have, exactly where it's going, and nobody's negotiating with them about it. Drop a comment below if you felt the shift. I want to know what that financial clarity felt like the first time it actually landed for you. Now here's the question everybody asks next. And if you've made this choice, you've heard it 100 times. And I want to answer it properly because the answer might surprise you. People will ask if you're lonely. They ask it like they already know the answer. Like they can't quite picture a man who's alone and not suffering. Let me tell you what you're not missing. You're not missing the drama, the fights that came out of nowhere because someone was bored or anxious or needed to test something. The argument that wasn't really about what it was about. The apology that got accepted but never quite forgotten. You're not missing the surveillance, the questions about where you've been, who you were talking to, why you seem distracted, the feeling of being watched in your own house. The emotional labor's gone too. Scanning the room before you walk through your own front door, measuring every word, walking on eggshells in a space you paid for. Gone too is the slow rearrangement, the hobbies that got squeezed out, the friends who faded, the interests that never developed because there was no room for them in a life that had been quietly rebuilt around someone else. You remember all of it, the way you remember something that used to cost you everything. And here's what replaced it. Picture this instead. Saturday morning, no alarm. You wake up when you wake up. You make coffee exactly the way you want it. You sit wherever you feel like sitting, and then you just decide. Maybe you grab the racing form and head to the OTB, or hit up the casino and play a few hours of Keno. Maybe you call Frank and Eddie, and the card game is happening in somebody's garage tonight, and you're in. Or you just do absolutely nothing at all, and that's fine too, because nobody's keeping score. The point is, it's yours the whole day. Nobody negotiating what it looks like. Nobody making you feel guilty for how you spend it. Nobody turning your Saturday into their Saturday. These men found their guys again. They found their routines, the things they let go of over the years, the track, the card nights, the long walks, the lottery numbers they've been playing since 1987. They got them back, not because those things are profound, because they're theirs. Mornings that open clean, evenings that come home to the same house you left. No storm waiting behind the door. No performance to rehearse on the way up the driveway. Just the space the way you left it. Quiet, yours, exactly right. And there's something worth knowing here. U.S. Census data shows that the percentage of men between 65 and 74 living alone has nearly doubled since 1970. And here's what the research keeps finding. These men aren't falling apart. They're not isolated. They're largely healthy. They're connected to people they actually chose. And by their own accounts, they're doing better than the men around them who stayed in situations that had stopped working years ago. That's not an accident. That's what happens when a man stops spending his energy on the wrong thing. The men who know this, who've actually lived both sides of it, wake up every morning to a house that's exactly as they left it. And they feel something it took some of them a while to name correctly, grateful. Now, this is the part nobody warns you about. And if you've already made this choice, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the judgment. It comes from everywhere. Your family, married friends, women who don't know you but somehow have opinions about your life. And it sounds like concern, but it feels like an attack. Your sister says, "Don't you want companionship?" Your buddy at work, the one who looks exhausted every Monday because his wife spent the weekend running him through the emotional obstacle course, he looks you dead in the eye and says, "Being alone is no way to live." And you're standing there thinking, "Brother, I'm watching your misery in real time, and you're telling me I have the problem." Here's what's actually happening. People who are stuck in something get uncomfortable around people who aren't. Your freedom isn't inspiring to them, it's threatening. Because if you can walk away and genuinely be better off, what does that say about their choice to stay? Your peace is a mirror they didn't ask to look into. And every time they see you on a Tuesday evening with no obligations and no drama, and no one asking where you've been, something in them shifts a little. That shift isn't your responsibility, but they'll try to make it yours. Don't let them. So the real question, the one that actually matters, is what did they choose instead? Not just what they left behind, but what they built in its place, what the actual daily life looks like when you finally stop explaining yourself. That's what I want to show you next. Everyone frames it as a loss, as giving up. The story of a man who tried, fell short, and settled into whatever was left. They've got it completely backwards. The men who've been living this long enough to have real perspective aren't describing subtraction. They built something, something deliberate, a life shaped around their own priorities, their own rhythm, their idea of what a good day actually looks like. You already heard from Kenneth at the top of this video. One divorce behind him, pension locked in, about to retire. He wrote, "I will never allow anyone in again." Sad, but that's how it works. And then he added something most people would read right past. He said it wasn't sadness he felt when he wrote that. It was relief. That word relief is the one that keeps showing up. Not happiness, not freedom, not pride, relief. The specific feeling of something heavy finally being set down. And then there's a story that hits differently than all the others, because it's not about a man who left, it's about a man who stayed. He commented on one of our videos, married 40 years, and he mentioned almost in passing that he and his wife have kept completely separate finances since year 5. His decision, her agreement. Separate accounts, separate financial lives inside a shared household. He's still there, still in it. And at the end of the comment, after laying all that out, he wrote one word, smile. That's it, just smile. Like a man who figured something out early enough to protect it, who found a way to stay in the situation without surrendering everything, who kept something genuinely his own, and 4 decades later finds that worth a quiet smile. And what the concerned friends, the worried family members, the people who can't quite understand it, what they cannot get their heads around is simple. These men aren't sad. They're not performing. They're not waiting for someone to come along and change their mind. Nobody's making the best of a bad situation here. They're done, not because they're broken or bitter or gave up on human connection, because they finally understand what they've built is worth more than what anyone ever offered them in exchange for it. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you exactly what that looks like in a man's daily life, in specific terms, because this is the part that finally makes it real. So what does it actually look like? What does it mean when a man finally chooses himself? It means your morning coffee is yours. Nobody walking in with a problem before you've had 2 sips. It means your money goes where you decide, not toward her mother's latest emergency, not toward a vacation you didn't want, not toward keeping up a standard of living that was never really yours to begin with. It means when you want to go play your numbers, you go play your numbers. When the guys are doing cards in the garage Friday night, you're there. When you feel like spending a Saturday afternoon at the track watching horses run, nobody's got an opinion about it. It means your weekends have nothing in them that you didn't put there. You go an entire week without a single argument, without one negotiation, without a single moment where you had to be someone other than who you actually are. And you wake up without dread. After decades of waking up already behind on something, that's everything, brother. And I know some of you are thinking, isn't that selfish? Yeah, it is. gloriously, unapologetically selfish. After 30 or 40 years of putting everyone else first and getting nothing close to the same in return, you've earned every second of it. Choosing yourself isn't giving up on love, it's giving up on a bad deal. It's looking at what you put in versus what you got back and making the same call any rational man would make on something that's been costing him for 30 years. You wouldn't keep pouring into something that took everything and gave back almost nothing and call it loyalty. You'd call it insanity. But when men do it in a relationship, we call it commitment. And when they finally stop, we call them broken. They're not broken, they're the sanest people in the room. If you've already made this choice, you know. You know what that first quiet morning felt like when you woke up and nobody needed anything from you. And instead of feeling empty, you felt like yourself for the first time in years. You know what it's like to check your bank account and not brace for it. You know the feeling of a Saturday with nothing in it you didn't choose. And if you're sitting on the edge of it right now, scared of what people will think, look at Kenneth. Look at Paranormal Pat. Look at the man who spent 40 years in a marriage, protected something that was his the whole time, and ended his comment with one word: smile. They were all scared too. Every single one of them sat exactly where you're sitting right now. It feels like peace, brother. Drop your age in the comments and tell me what your life looks like now, or what you want it to look like. And if you know a man who needs to hear this, send it to him. See you in the next one. Take care. If this story changed the way you look at the quiet strength of solitude, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history and the truths that society has tried to bury. Let's cultivate a future of clarity. The next treasure of wisdom will be opened soon.